Hey, thanks so much for joining me. This is the forecast for Monday, February 24th through Sunday, March 2nd, 2025. Already ending February and beginning March this week, so very exciting. I think it's especially exciting because we're ramping up in the intensity. We already saw this intensity really kick into gear back in Aquarius season a couple of weeks ago. Now we have the sun still pretty freshly in Pisces, so getting deeper and deeper into Pisces season. And Pisces season in general, I think there tends to be an uptick in the energy, especially for us in the northern hemisphere, because it's the month or so immediately before the spring equinox. So there's more and more light coming. We're almost reaching a kind of critical mass that comes at the very end of Pisces going into Aries. So in other words, we're leading into spring. Depending on your region, your latitude, there are already spring-like conditions kind of gradually coming back into the picture as the light is building, the energy is coming back. That's why Pisces is such a hopeful, such an optimistic sign. So that would occur around this time of year any year. The difference with this year, I think what's making it extra intense and interesting, is that we are coming up upon eclipse season very rapidly. We have two eclipses in March. This is the chart for the first one. So basically there's a total lunar eclipse March 14th and a partial solar eclipse March 29th. This week we're going to have a new moon. Actually, at first, I'm going to be honest with you, I thought this new moon was going to be a new moon solar eclipse because it is fairly close to the nodes. It's close to the north node. But technically this is not an eclipse, it's just a new moon. I would say though, because we are so close to eclipse season and because the new moon is relatively close to the north node, although it's not an eclipse, I do think this will be a more intense new moon this week than perhaps your average new moon. Even though it doesn't aspect a whole lot, it is going to be especially meaningful, and I'll talk more about that once we get into the day-by-day forecast. But yeah, that's the main event. Getting deeper into Pisces season, approaching the eclipse season. One more way of kind of putting that into like a different perspective would be this new moon is starting the lunar cycle that is going to be eclipse season, if that makes sense. So 2 weeks after this new moon, that's where we're going to get the full moon lunar eclipse on March 14th. So yeah, definitely ramping up in the intensity. One side note as well with eclipse season, it's not just the eclipses themselves that are intense, it's the entire lunar cycle. So pay attention to 1 week from this week, next week, the quarter moon in Gemini next week. That's going to be more intense because then we'll be really ramping up into eclipse season, if that makes sense. In other news, Mars just recently stationed direct back on Sunday the 23rd, so just immediately before this week's forecast. So as we get into this week, especially early in the week, Mars is still basically stationary. It really hasn't picked up steam yet, so to speak. So Mars is extra intense and it is still debilitated in Cancer. So in other words, I think we're really processing and reaching a turning point when it comes to our ambitions, our desires. Those things may have been a little bit more outside the box, a little bit harder to connect to. But if you can connect with what motivates you, it's going to be especially individualistic and especially rich and new because of Mars stationing direct so recently. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. Two more things about this week. So we're also going to be entering Mercury pre-shadow late this week, and so I'll talk about what that means in more detail in the forecast. But basically it just means that Mercury is traveling super fast at this time. Most of the aspects in general anytime tend to be from Mercury because Mercury travels so quickly, but especially now because the other thing happening this week is Venus stationing retrograde. So because Venus is relatively, a pretty quick moving planet, Venus tends to make a lot of aspects as well, but we actually have an entire month of no major Venus aspects whatsoever because Venus is stationing retrograde this week. at 10 degrees Aries, where, she's just not really aspecting a whole lot. She doesn't quite reach the sextile to Jupiter that would have happened at 11 Aries. But anyway, Venus stationing retrograde, that's also a big deal. So it's so funky around this time, because again, Mars just stationed direct, Venus is stationing retrograde, and then in a couple weeks from now, March 15th, Mercury will station retrograde. But I don't want to confuse you. Let's just focus on Venus. So with Venus stationing retrograde this week, it's so funky because both Venus and Mars are debilitated. But again, one's coming out of retrograde, one's going into retrograde. Venus stationing retrograde in Aries. That would suggest that it also suggests that the pleasure has been a little bit difficult to connect to. With Venus in Aries, we can be a little bit impulsive or restless. We can be bored easily. We want excitement. Yet at the same time, because Venus is stationing retrograde, we're pulling back. We're withdrawing. We're rethinking our pleasures, the desire, the abundance. All of this is up for reconsideration, rethinking, and just kind of processing over the next few weeks as Venus will be retrograde. One other main note for this week, there's a huge focus in Pisces, also to some extent Aries, but for a few days, like kind of mid to late this week, there will be 4 planets plus the North Node all in Pisces. So huge focus on Pisces. Pisces is, not only is it Pisces season, but there's the Pisces stellium. What do you have in Pisces? What house is that for you? What planets do you have there? That's what's being highlighted. That's the part of your life where you can expect a lot of changes and kind of a new chapter forming. So if you have like Sun in Pisces, for example, you're the star. This is your time to shine, but it's also time for you to go through a lot of changes. Whatever you have in Pisces has been challenged for the last couple of years with Saturn there. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Whatever you have in Pisces is very much kind of in its element, so to speak. So again, if you have like Sun, Moon, or Rising there, you're very in your element, but you're processing a lot of really heavy stuff right now as well. And same goes for anything else, like if your midheaven's in Pisces, it's your career, your reputation that's undergoing a lot of changes. If it's your descendant, that's your, relationships are changing a lot, etc. If you want more information, you can always leave a comment or reach out to me. I leave my email in the description of every video that I post. You can also reach out to me for a reading if that's what if you are interested in something a little bit more in depth. Check out my website. You can purchase readings there. Anyway, but yeah, 4 planets in Pisces, huge Pisces and Aries cluster. Depending on how you look at it, I think Pisces and Aries are so intense, being ruled by Jupiter and Mars, being clustered, being centered around the spring equinox. I really view Pisces as like an upswing. We're coming out of the emptiness of winter. Winter is very much kind of a dream time, I think. These signs following the winter solstice, Capricorn and Aquarius, are just so... I think there's such an emptiness there that it really allows us to have, big visions and dreams of the future and, huge goals. That's kind of what comes about with Capricorn and Aquarius. So in many ways, Pisces continues that. But again, the difference is that we're approaching the spring equinox. We're approaching that tipping point where pretty soon there's going to be more daylight than darkness. And then that's where things get really action oriented as we enter spring and Aries in March. But yeah, let's go through this week. So when it comes to the moon will be transiting from Capricorn through Aries this week. And of course, we will have that new moon in Pisces as well. Okay, but let's get started here. Let's talk about Monday. So Monday, February 24th, we don't have any major aspects today, technically. We will have moon in Capricorn all day, basically, which I really like. In terms of Sun being in Pisces with moon in Capricorn, these are actually very complementary energies. Both Pisces and Capricorn, they are very different energies. But one commonality is that if you can combine like the intuition, the dreaminess, the vision of Pisces, the feeling, Pisces is so great when it comes to manifesting. So if we can combine that energy with Sun and a couple other planets in Pisces, combining that with Moon in Capricorn, which is so productive and so strategic, so realistic and pragmatic, combining both of those really gives you the best of both worlds when it comes to envisioning, coming up with goals that are attainable, goals that are realistic in a like materialistic and a literal sense, but also deep and fulfilling, on an emotional or spiritual level as well. So in other words, Monday is really great for coming up with goals, dreams, plans. I did notice something. So very early in the day on Monday, the specifics of that depend on your time zone, of course. But for most of us in like North America or Europe, for example, where most of my viewers are, most of us early in the day will experience Moon at around 17 Capricorn opposing Mars, which again is freshly direct. So especially if you have placements around 17 degrees Cancer or Capricorn, you may have something sudden and intense occur on Monday. You may suddenly become aware of your desires. This may feel uncomfortable. Both Moon and Mars are out of place. They're exiled. They're debilitated. So this will be uncomfortable, but I think this can be really advantageous though. Moon in Capricorn, Mars in Cancer, these are both great energies for getting us uncomfortable, getting us riled up, and therefore getting us motivated to make some kind of change or improvement. So again, that's true for everyone on some level, but especially if you have placements around 17 Cancer or Capricorn, that's going to be an area of perhaps stress for you, or sudden change, or impulsiveness, restlessness, feeling weird, or not your normal self. But again, that is so useful when it comes to productivity, motivation, etc. Going to Tuesday, February 25th, Moon does leave Capricorn and enters Aquarius pretty early in the day. And pretty much as soon as Moon enters Aquarius, it, reaches that conjunction to Pluto and then passes Pluto. So again, it is different from Monday, but the commonality is that there's still that intensity there. I forgot to mention we had this kind of waning crescent moon on Monday that kind of continues on Tuesday, but by Tuesday the moon is becoming a dark moon. It's approaching the sun. It's wrapping up the lunar cycle. So there is that intensity there, but in general the energy is kind of winding down, at least in a short-term context when it comes to the moon. It sort of depends, astrology gets so confusing because there's so many different cycles happening simultaneously. In a long-term perspective, like a month-to-month perspective, I would say the energy is very much ramping up. But on a more short-term, like day-to-day level, the moon's energy is winding down. So it kind of just depends on how you look at it. We're winding down, we're winding up. Both are sort of true simultaneously on Tuesday. There is one aspect... there's one aspect on Tuesday besides Moon crossing over Pluto. Mercury crosses over Saturn as well at 20 degrees Pisces. So especially if you have placements around 20 Pisces, that could represent an area where you're getting really realistic and you may be learning a lot. Mercury conjunct Saturn is very much focused on learning. Challenging yourself, learning something new, branching out, but doing so in a slow, steady, maybe a cautious kind of way. It is interesting though, Mercury and Saturn being in Pisces, where they're both a little bit out of place there. Mercury and Saturn want to make sense of everything. They want to measure things. They want to find the structure. But being in Pisces, we're applying this structure and this very like practical mental energy into a realm that is not necessarily practical or logical, if that makes sense. So in other words, with this aspect, I see us really wanting to define and figure out our own spirituality, our own intuition. What are your dreams? What is your vision? What are you aiming to manifest? Maybe on an emotional level. Again, this is a very dreamy kind of emotional area, but we're applying this very like realistic, practical modality to it, or mentality to it, if that makes sense. Quick side note too, Mercury is still, of course, debilitated. Mercury's in fall and detriment being in Pisces. So we may not always be completely thinking clearly at this time. yeah, it may be difficult to rationalize things or to make sense of things or be objective. On the other hand, though, with Mercury debilitated, this is a great time for thinking outside the box, looking at different alternatives, maybe being open to information that you normally wouldn't be privy to or you wouldn't be open to. For instance, people who are born with Mercury in Pisces are really great at just being open to strange ideas, different belief systems, etc. So that's kind of what we're all experiencing on some level here. It is interesting as well. There is kind of a loose trine between Mars at 17 Cancer and Mercury and Saturn at 20 Pisces. Overall, there's this kind of, I think there's more of there's definitely a water focus, a lot of water placements. Again, I think we're wanting to be very realistic with our desires, but fundamentally these are emotional things, though. So being logical with our emotions, if that makes sense, being practical with what we're manifesting. That's kind of the name of the game here. Going to Wednesday, February 26th. I want to kind of breeze through these first days of the week if I can, because really the juicy stuff happens a little bit later, if I'm being totally honest. So Wednesday, again, the lunar cycle is winding down. The moon is hardly visible at this point. Moon continues transiting through Aquarius. So again, this is kind of an awkward sign for the moon to be in, but great for having self-awareness, maintaining a certain level of detachment. It does tend to get a little bit weird as the moon approaches the sun, because the moon is so dark at this time. There may be a lot going on for us subconsciously, a lot going on mentally, within our dreams, within our psyche. That's my take on the moon. The less light the moon has, the more activity is really applying to us mentally or spiritually rather than like physically, if that makes sense. Like this is, we're getting to the opposite kind of dynamic of the full moon. The more light the moon has, the more physical activity there is. It's very literal. So here we're entering a very dreamy, very spiritual phase of the moon. Basically, we're winding down. This is a really great time starting on Wednesday, and this will only increase. We're entering a really great time to just engage with slower pastimes that kind of activate your spirituality. So pastimes that are slow or methodical in nature are always great for boosting intuition, but especially with the moon at the end of its kind of cycle like this, that's really what I would recommend. Wednesday is interesting. I think Wednesday is very much a transitional day. I think, if we tune in, we can sense that there's a new beginning coming, but we're not quite there yet on Wednesday. Going to Thursday. So Thursday, very early in the day, Eastern time, moon enters Pisces, where I think moon is much more at home in Pisces than Aquarius, for sure. I think Pisces, other than Cancer or Taurus, I'd say Pisces is the most fitting sign for the moon to be in. We tend to be, very receptive, warm, dreamy, intuitive with moon in Pisces. But again, this starts the whole stellium that I was talking about. So North Node, Neptune, North Node, Mercury, Saturn, Sun, and Moon. So I think I was actually wrong in the intro. I think I said 4 planets are in Pisces, but actually it's 5 if you include the moon, 6 if you include the North Node, which is not a planet, but 6 things going on in Pisces, 6 placements there. So again, huge focus on Pisces. Maybe I'll make that the title, like 6 placements in Pisces, huge stellium there. Pisces is a huge transitional sign. There's also the new moon today. I'm going to talk about that. But first, Pisces in general, huge transition. Many of us regard Pisces as the end. More and more so, I actually regard Sagittarius as the end, or maybe Scorpio. At this point in Pisces, we are you could view it as like an ending or a beginning. It's a transition. We're transitioning from one cycle to another. That's basically what's going on. Pisces just has such optimism. There's so much openness. We're leaving the emptiness of winter and slowly building, more energy, more light, I think it's exciting getting close to that cusp of Aries. Obviously we're not there yet. We still have a few weeks. But that's what Pisces is all about. It's all about the optimism of expansion, really. Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, so it's a lucky sign. It's hopeful, it's optimistic, it's warm. It knows that the light is building and building and continuing, and we're leaving this very dark time that happens every winter and entering something much more light and generally fun and warm for everyone to experience. So very powerful stuff. And yeah, late in the day, Eastern time, we will have the new moon at 9 degrees Pisces. I mentioned how the new moon's pretty close to the north node. I was surprised that this is not an eclipse because it's only, my notes say that the north node is at 27 Pisces. This site that I'm using says north node is at 28 Pisces. But either way, the new moon is 12 degrees away from the north node. So in other words, it's not quite an eclipse, but it's almost an eclipse, because that's what it takes for an eclipse to happen: a new moon or a full moon close to the nodes or one of the nodes. So in other words, this is an intense new moon. I think a new moon happening in Pisces, that also makes it more intense. New moons tend to be so oriented toward manifestation, and it is a new beginning, but not in a really active, volatile sense. New moons can be volatile, but they, more often than not, it's more of a new beginning, like planting the seed, so to speak, having a new idea, a new vision, a new dream. It's the very beginning of manifestation, which actually starts in the ether, not in the physical realm, if that makes sense. So yeah, again, I would really encourage you to, if you feel like sleeping a lot at this time, get more rest, more sleep if you can. If you have a slower pastime that you enjoy, like meditation, reading, writing, maybe music, calming music especially, or I was going to say going on a drive, but who can afford that these days? Going on a walk, spending time in nature, whatever it is that you do, journaling. These pastimes are really great anytime we have a lot of Pisces energy, or Virgo for that matter, but that's kind of besides the point. I think these pastimes are really great for slowing our minds down, and that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck when it comes to like manifesting. At least that's the best way I've found. That's the best way I can put it. Let's look at this new moon with more detail though. So the new moon doesn't exactly aspect anything. Moon and sun conjunct at 9 degrees Pisces. They do make a square to Jupiter at 12 Gemini. Jupiter is still a little slow. Jupiter stationed direct in Gemini a few weeks ago. It's still been hanging out at basically, it's stationed direct at 11 Gemini, and it's only at 12 Gemini now. So Jupiter is a little bit more intense than usual. We're entering a more expansive phase with Jupiter still relatively freshly direct. So now having this square from the new moon in Pisces, it's really interesting. I think there's this huge energy, this huge theme of expansion and openness. Pisces is such an open sign. Gemini is very open as well. And I think these are the two areas of the main focus. Pisces is by far the main focus here, as I've explained. But Jupiter rules Pisces. Jupiter rules over all of these different planets, all these things going on in Pisces. Jupiter rules the new moon and is being squared by it. So Jupiter in Gemini is also a huge focal point here. So again, expansion, being open to new ideas, new concepts, new activities, new lifestyles. That's what Jupiter is all about. That's what Gemini and Pisces are all about as well. These are the two most open signs. They're the most adaptable. They're the hardest to pin down. They're constantly changing. So that's likely what we're experiencing at this time. Things are constantly changing. Things are not quite what they seem. Things are actually very complex right now, and they're changing rapidly. Things are building. Things are developing. There may be many different phases kind of ending and beginning at this time. What else? I think it can be confusing. There's a lot of change being thrown at us right now. I think we can all experience that, especially when it comes to so much mutable energy. There's just so much going on so many different fronts. It's impossible to completely make sense of it all right now. But the more you can be kind of like a mutable sign, the more you can be like Gemini, or especially like Pisces, be a little fluid. Do you have a mutable placement? Do you have water or air placements? Those are, tapping into those malleable placements. That's what's really going to help you to adapt to this energy, because being adaptable is like the main thing right now. That's what's really going to help you with this kind of energy. We're very much at an ending, and we're very much we're so close to this cusp of huge new beginnings that are going to be happening in March, and then even more so later in spring as well. So yeah, really exciting stuff. But right now it's vague, it's ambiguous. There's something, we're so close to something really new and powerful, but it hasn't quite developed yet. This is the week of conception, so to speak. We're not having the baby yet. The baby's not visible yet. It's not, it's just an idea right now. It's a feeling, so to speak, or whatever, I'm just using that as an example, obviously, but whatever it is for you, I think we're all, let me just put it this way. I think shit's really going to hit the fan for all of us on an individual and a collective level by late spring, early summer. So in a weird way, this is actually kind of the beginning of that. Things are beginning perhaps in a more, depending on how you look at it, things do look chaotic right now, but really I think things are actually beginning in a kind of quiet way for us now. Only later are we going to see that everything is truly beginning now. One aspect too, this is kind of a side note, but Mercury at 23 Pisces early in the day on Thursday will sextile Uranus at 23 Taurus. So okay, so in addition to everything else going on, this sextile between Mercury and Uranus, it indicates awakening, sudden ideas, shifts in perception, figuring things out in a really quick and kind of unpredictable way. I always say with this kind of aspect, this is not necessarily, it's unexpected, right? So it's not necessarily something that you are intending. You don't necessarily always have to work hard for this new awakening. Maybe it's something that you've been working hard for, but this kind of awakening, this idea, this perception shift, it's going to come to you out of nowhere. That's how Uranus operates. I also want to mention real quick before we move on, so many debilitated placements, right? Like the sextile between Mercury and Uranus, for instance. Uranus is in fall in Taurus, Mercury's in fall and detriment in Pisces. Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini, Mars is in fall in Cancer, and of course Venus is in detriment in Aries as well. My apologies if I'm forgetting any others, but even just those, there's a lot of debilitated placements, and honestly there have been for months now, because of Uranus and Jupiter, and then plus Mars, and plus these more relatively short-term transits of Venus and Mercury. A lot of debilitated energy. So what does that mean? So it basically means that we might be a little uncomfortable. We might not be feeling like our normal selves. We might be doing things that we wouldn't normally do. That can feel disconcerting. That can feel strange, foreign, kind of alien. We're not feeling, like our normal selves. But the plus side of that, though, is that we may be open to new perspectives. We may be looking outside the box. We may be realizing things that, whatever the status quo is, whatever, the people that we would normally associate with, the things we'd normally do, this energy is very incompatible with those things. So you may be making different kinds of friends, associating with different people, having different ideas. It's all very new. It's all very strange. And much of this no one will understand but yourself, if that makes sense. You may be making choices that the people you'd normally look to in your life, they're not going to understand these choices, because these are things that we're figuring out on a very individual level, if that makes sense. So it's really strange when you think about we're all going through this together and we're going through similar themes, but we're doing so, the very nature of it is independent. So we are figuring things out together, but independently. It gets confusing, but hopefully that makes sense. Let's go to Friday, February 28th, the last day of the month. I think this day really just kind of continues the new moon of Thursday, if that makes sense, because the moon is still in Pisces. We still have 4, 5, 6 planets in Pisces, depending on how you want to define planet. North Node is really not a planet, so let's say five planets in Pisces. So that continues. We already had that Thursday, and we're still very much, within the realm of the new moon. The moon has separated from the sun at this point, but the moon is still barely visible, if at all. So yeah, again, we're still very much like in the womb, so to speak. Like, we're conceiving this new idea, this new, it's still a great day for manifestation. If you missed it Thursday, if you were like really busy with work or something Thursday and you couldn't relax, if you do get a chance Friday, it continues to be a really great day for manifesting. Just think about what your intentions are Thursday and or Friday. What do you want? What are you envisioning? What would you like for the next month or the next year, etc.? Like, what do you want, right? These more like benefic energies, these benefic ruled signs such as Pisces, I think are really great at focusing on what they want and seeing the glass half full. So yeah, I think doing that, it'll really help your manifestation right now. With so many Pisces placements and with the new moon still so close, there's such powerful manifesting energy right now. So it'll be really interesting to see what the collective consciousness manifests at this time. We're not going to really know what it is until later in the lunar cycle. Like, give it a week until we get that first quarter moon in Gemini. That's where it's going to be really in your face, and you're going to see this huge new beginning that's starting. But again, it's something that's truly starting now, Thursday, Friday, in our minds, in our spirits, etc. Going to Saturday, March 1st. A lot's happening today. So first of all, early in the day, Eastern time, I don't know why I said Mars. Moon leaves Pisces and enters Aries. So yeah, yes, Aries is a very active sign. However, keep in mind, Moon still has hardly any light. Moon is very gradually, waxing, it's gaining light, but it takes a little bit of time. It's going to have much more energy in a couple days when Moon is in Taurus, where we get that waxing crescent moon. But we're not there yet. Moon is basically like a sliver at this point. So that very much represents how much we can see this new beginning. The moon only has a little bit of light, so we can only barely begin to start to see whatever we've manifested the last couple days, if that makes sense. We're still in the very early phases of this. But there are a couple other things that happen today that are interesting. So the biggest thing would be Venus stationing retrograde. Venus stations retrograde at 10 degrees Aries. Very timely, because very late on Saturday, early on Sunday, Moon will cross over Venus, as Venus has just stationed retrograde at 10 degrees Aries. So that's a big deal. What do you have around 10 degrees Aries? You may be rethinking the pleasure, the abundance of that area in your charts. Okay. So typically wherever Venus is, Venus brings love, pleasure, abundance, right? So there may be some kind of abundance in Aries, whatever that house is for you. There's the pleasure and abundance there, but it's something that you're going to be rethinking and reconfiguring over the next several weeks as Venus starts its retrograde process, if that makes sense. But yeah, this really comes to a head in an extra potent way this weekend as the moon crosses over that same area. Quick factoid for you: Venus retrogrades the least out of any planet. I believe Venus retrogrades, it definitely spends the least amount of time retrograde. So this is very unusual, especially having Venus in detriment for this retrograde as well. It's something that the vast majority of us are not familiar with this. I believe, don't quote me on this, I think it's 8% of the population that's born with Venus retrograde. It could be less than that. If any of you know, you can definitely comment for me. I'd love that. But it's something like 8% or less of people that are born with Venus retrograde. So in other words, 92% of us or more are really not used to this. It's different. It's weird. Um, and it can be difficult. Both the great benefics, Jupiter and Venus, are in detriment right now. So again, it's hard to connect with the pleasure, the abundance. It is there. It's just that we're going to have to think outside the box to connect with that more pleasurable side of life. Also today, very interesting, Mercury enters the pre-shadow at 26 degrees Pisces, and then later within the same day, Mercury crosses over the North Node at around 27 Pisces. So, in other words, Mercury entering the pre-shadow, it basically means that Mercury is entering the area that it will relatively soon, it will retrograde back over this area. Mercury is going to station retrograde on March 15th at 9 degrees Aries. Very interesting that Mercury and Venus are basically stationing retrograde at the same place, 10 or 9 degrees Aries. Although, it is a couple weeks apart, but it's the same part of Aries. So I can't stress this enough. It's a really big deal. If whatever placements you have around 9 or 10 degrees Aries, if you have any there, you're going to really be rethinking and doing a lot of soul searching with that placement or with that house, whatever house that falls in for you. Especially like throughout the month of March. But for now, Mercury entering the pre-shadow, it basically just means that, we are zooming ahead so fast right now. We're not fully integrating everything, and that's okay. Like, how can you possibly make sense of everything? How can you possibly make sense of all these Pisces transits, the mutable transits in general? Just so many new developments happening right now. You can't make sense of it all. It's just we're kind of winging it, and that's okay. The Mercury retrograde starting in mid-March, that's what's going to allow us to slow down and get a more thorough understanding of what's been happening, basically. But I'll talk about that when we get there. One other thing too that I think is very interesting. So Mercury crossing the North Node so close to, or on the same day that Mercury enters the pre-shadow, it basically means that the Mercury retrograde that starts on March 15th will culminate, it'll conclude with, basically Mercury will start the retrograde at 9 Aries, and it'll go all the way back to 27 Pisces where the North Node has been. So in other words, we're going to be processing something really major, especially in terms of our growth. I think society, people, the collective, the masses, we're very ready for something new. I think we've wanted something new for a long time now. Like, for instance, Obama took advantage of that kind of, I'm not giving a positive or negative opinion on him, by the way. I'm not getting political. I'm just saying, we've been wanting hope and change for decades. The difference, though, is that I think we're truly ready for something new here. The last couple of years with Neptune and Saturn in Pisces, we've been in this ending phase. 2023, 2024 have been hard. I think we've been kind of disillusioned. This tends to happen whenever Saturn is in Pisces. Every 27 to 30 years, we lose focus. We don't have any direction. We don't know what to believe anymore. Things are confusing. Any viewpoint, as ridiculous as it seems, you can look up some study or there's some argument for it. We just have no idea what to believe anymore. So this kind of directionlessness with these outer planets being in Pisces, that's what you have to go through. You have to go through the fog before you can get to the clarity, and the things become much more black and white when you get to Aries. But we're not quite there yet, but we're so close. Mercury having this retrograde where it will go back to the North Node, it's showing that over the next few weeks and really through the month of March, we're going to be developing and growing in a really profound way. That's the best way I can put it. I hope that made sense. I know that was a little it is a little convoluted, but yeah, I think it's very exciting as well. By the way, look at this huge Aries Pisces conglomerate. Going to Sunday, March 2nd, Sun actually squares Jupiter. So Sun at 12 Pisces squares Jupiter at 12 Gemini. So it's the word that just came to me was like scatterbrained. Gemini and Pisces are so scattered. This is scattered energy. There's probably a lot going on in your life, and it's not just one area. It's everywhere. Like work is crazy, personal life is crazy, the relationship is crazy, or whatever it is, whatever you do, it's like you can't find a break. Like there's development happening everywhere. So that could be very exciting or very overwhelming depending on how you look at it. Also today, Mercury crosses over Neptune, and yeah, it's very strange. So Neptune's, pretty close to the end of Pisces. Mercury also was reaching the end of Pisces today. And this is very strange. So Mercury is already debilitated. Mercury's not at home. Mercury's, in this far off, strange place being in Pisces. And now Mercury has to cross over Neptune, which is very at home. But I think this doubles down on this like strange ethereal energy. It's difficult to be rational. It's difficult to make sense of things and to be objective. But again, this is really great for making sense of, measure what is not measurable, making sense of our spirituality, our psyche, our dreams, making sense of our own kind of subjective viewpoint. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm so struggling with this, if you can't tell already, because it's just by its very nature, it's very strange and weird. I don't know, that's the best way I could put it. But this can also be really great for building intuition. So it's almost like, rather than analyzing everything right now, this energy is really much more oriented toward intuiting everything, feeling everything. Mercury's not acting like its normal self. Mercury's been drugged or something. Mercury's half asleep. So really, rather than having a brain, we more have like a dream, if that makes sense. We're dreaming something. But that can be equally, if not more powerful, especially when it comes to manifestation. So yeah, really exciting stuff. That's pretty much what I have for you this week. Next week, Mercury changes signs. That's probably pretty evident, but this is so exciting. I love Mercury transiting in the Mars ruled sign, Scorpio, or in this case, Aries. I think Mercury has lots of fun in the Mars ruled signs. I'll explain why next week. And we also get a quarter moon, so both those things are going to really shake things up, and it's going to be very exciting. We're going to see what we've created as early as next week. So I hope you have a fantastic week. Definitely let me know if you have any questions or if I can help you in any way. Otherwise, have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week.